Well, today reminds me of the parable Jesus told about the man who built a huge mound. It goes something like this. There was a man who did the same thing every day. He woke, he went to the gym, he got his breakfast at the same diner. He checked his email, he picked up his mail at the post office, he went to work and returned home on the same path he took every day. Jesus did tell you this parable, didn't he? Year after year, he repeated this feeling, this pattern, feeling very responsible and consistent. To his credit, he knew a few people really well. At the end of his life, it was noted that he had worn down a huge circle that he had walked every day of his life, so worn down that it built up in the middle of it, of his predictable path, a mound of prejudice and ideas that reinforced his belief system and what he heard on Fox News. Another man, his brother, did something different every day. Willy-nilly, he lived his life. Jesus used the word nilly-lily. He went about doing whatever the wind told him to do, and this man, the brother of the mound guy, felt no responsibility and had no connections and knew no one, and he faded away. Jesus said to the disciples, "Don't be like those guys." The tuner of the instrument, he said, makes the strings not too tight and not too loose. Or maybe that was what the Buddha said. But the message is the same. The parable is warning us what Unitarian and Transcendentalist Ralph Waldo Emerson warned, that a foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. That doing the same thing day in and day out doesn't expand our horizons, but doing the opposite gives us no sense of the horizon. So what do we do with that spiritual lesson? The parable reminds me of something kind of odd that happens to me when I run into members of this church who have moved away. What happens is I don't remember all the circumstances of their lives. Sometimes I don't even remember their names. I'm sorry, there are a lot of you. But I remember where they sat in church and with whom. Now, I don't have a ministerial superpower, but you all do this thing where, for the most part, you sit in the exact same place where you sit every week, and you come and sit with the same people. You are creatures of habit. You're sitting with your favorite people in your favorite seats. The danger is that you are at risk of knowing only a few people here. Maybe people who are kind of similar to who you are, who affirm who you are. In sociology, this is called social narrowing. So let's experiment for a moment. Are you sitting with a friend here? Did you bring a friend today? A side note here, if you love a restaurant, don't you bring that friend to the restaurant? So if you love this church, you should be bringing friends to church. That's a different sermon. But look at the people you're sitting with. Are they the same gender, race, sexual orientation, age? Do they kind of look like you? My guess is yes. We all do this. And there's comfort in similarity. But we also all need new ideas and new resources and new views of the world. And it's hard to get that from the people who are just like us. Sometimes your ties to people in your groups are there to affirm who you are. The networks you have, though, can be redundant, and the people that you don't meet just tell you who you are and what you're about. Whereas the people that you might meet are people who can introduce you to a new world. One of the problems is that we filter and we make judgments about each other even without thinking about it. So it's comfortable to remain in our circles. We say, you're interesting, you're not interesting, you're relevant, you're not relevant. We do this without a conscious thought. So I want you to look around this room right now. Those of you who are not online, look around this room. Really, I mean, look around this room and find the least interesting person to you. And after church, I want you to go up to them and find out something about them. The least interesting person that you can find in this room right now. That is your homework. Do you accept your homework? Come on, people. I know the first service is more introverted, but this is how we build on community. If we are going to widen our circles in our lives, we have to practice it. The most interesting person to us in this room might not tell us anything new. We have to find ways to be able to understand our own biases and then break through them. Only when we do this do we begin to do the work of this church. We have to be able to connect beyond the circles we create. We have to create new social hubs. We have to be willing to break the patterns in our lives. And there are so many forces against us doing that, especially for those of us with the resources to isolate and create barriers from the world, because we can put layers between us and others. I have seen this in my own neighborhood. The more fancier the cars get, the higher the home values get, the less people use their porches, the less people walk around, the less they talk to one another. Some of us are primed to bunker ourselves in the circles we create. And studies have shown that we who can bunker ourselves, when we get into stress or grief, or we feel threatened, or we get ill, we retreat even further. I can't tell you how many times over my ministry here, someone disappears from the church, only later to reemerge saying that they had a bad illness or lost a job or went through a divorce or a death in the family, which is precisely the kinds of moments when they should enter into the church and not retreat from it. The result of all this is the isolation we grow, the self-quarantine, is that it threatens our ability to understand one another, to receive support and love. And remember that our spiritual work is to widen the circles of our lives, not to contract them. So that's why this church has wisely said this in our third end or goal. This is the Ends Times series. The board of our church with me has stated a third goal, that we widen the circle of inclusivity, that we commit to racial equity and ensure that our human diversity in all its many dimensions is reflected in worship, leadership, and the work of the church. So that you come to church and see a genuinely inclusive community, that you sit next to people who are different than you are and who are as welcome as you are. The goal is that we have a wide and deep perception and understanding of all the ways the congregation is diverse, and we open our lives accordingly to that. That we grow in our ability to hear one another's voices and stories that emerge from that diversity. We include those voices in the church work and in the leadership. And in this way, our congregational commitments reflect the diversity we see in the wider world. What I have said about this is that The commitment to racial equity calls us to ensure that people of all racial backgrounds have what they need to survive. We start by learning together about the way in which violence has been used for economic control of and power over other human beings, resulting in shared traumas and racial inequities. And we move to courageous actions that counter those oppressions and heal those traumas. I guarantee you this, most churches in Dallas don't have this as a goal. They are busy propping up their dogmatic positions and creeds and beliefs and rituals. But here, we are saying that God is this, is in inclusivity and the effort to understand it and get out of our comfortable circles. God is that. We are saying that if there is a God, she doesn't want empty rituals and policies that divide people passed off as dogmatic religious truths. She wants communities of open-hearted, loving people who widen the circles of their spiritual lives by all ways that we try to live here in our faith. And what our church has said about this is that there's a related end or goal, and that is that together we sustain and steward the church and our larger Unitarian Universalist movement for the future. Together we do this. That means that you claim your ownership of this church and faith, that these efforts that get us out of our individual mound-building tracks and communal mound-building efforts and contribute time and talent and treasure in a mutual exchange of giving and receiving that ensures the church thrives in this way. It means that together we are here to make room for everyone and grow our circles of understanding and hope in the world. It is why I have raised my own 2023 pledge by 10%. It's why I prioritize my giving in the world to the church, a church that pays me and I give it back. Because I believe so strongly in our ability to widen circles of our lives and our communities that save and enliven real lives. So the work is ours, but it is also yours. One way we do this is we enter into a process of widening the circle of inclusivity through racial equity work, starting with ourselves, confronting what we have been taught about each other, finding ways to see one another, to hear each other into speech, to tune our thoughts and words so that we can love one another. And we do this to practice how to love our differences, not to hope for a gray out of color or culture, but to see it and to name it in its great complexity that nourishes us and does not confine us. And to sustain our church and faith, we invest. We give of ourselves. We throw ourselves into the work that widens the circles of inclusivity, and we live in widening circles, as the poet said, that do not demand we lose our worth, but rather demands that we shed what holds us back from soaring around spiritual questions of our lives. And the things that hold us back from loving and holding each human being in regard builds mounds of prejudice. And it might be comfortable to walk that track, but it's rarely expanding. To widen the circle of your spiritual life, you are called on to live your life in widening circles, as the poet wrote. Now, the speaker in the center of that poem wants to stretch, wants to find ways to include more of the world. The speaker seeks new experiences and new people and exhilarating and frightening things at the same time, widening the experience of the world, giving his whole self to it, not tentative, not holding back, the whole self, launching forward and hoping the sacred world will catch him. The poet knows this is not some easy task. The poet says, I may not complete this last one, but I give myself to it. The cost could be real, possibly more than he can afford. Still, he knows the widening his circles is not about the end result, but about the process, about the people he meets along the way, about the good he does for his fellow human beings, about the skills he learns, about the art he creates, about the love he gives and receives, about the unending quest for understanding. The goal here is to live our lives in circles that widen to include more people and more ideas and more experiences, rather than to live in contracting spaces that seek to cut off and label each other and box each other up and close off relationships and live in easy definitions of others so that we can be comfortable. Am I talking to you right now? Are there people in your lives that you are doing that to? Defining and contracting from? There are in mine. And this is as much a reminder to you as it is to me. Because when we fail to expand the circle work of our spiritual lives, we start to believe that people are no longer useful to us. We commoditize them. We see others as scary and we label them as enemy. We perpetuate dialogues that disenfranchise and tear at the fabric of communities. We have seen this in spades in the last bunch of years. This is the core of the racial equity problem, when the narrative is that some, because of their skin or heritage, deserve nothing of this sacred world, deserve no cooperation in uplifting their lives, no help to thrive and grow and expand the circles of their lives. We fail each other. This is at the root of white supremacy culture. I'm not talking about people in hoods. I'm talking about the culture that we have built this country on, forged in manifest destiny to drive off indigenous people and forge systems of slavery and disenfranchisement of people from their own interconnectivity to others and their ability to live in widening circles and in the sacred nature of the world. And that is wrong. Human life and spiritual life is built to live in widening circles of the Spirit so that we embrace each other. Our ability to grow and see another's worth and dignity is the work of this church, is the holy work of our lives, is at the core of what we try to celebrate here, is at the mandate to love one another and to be held by something bigger than ourselves. And that is why Rilke turns the wheel on this poem and puts at the center of the poem God. The poet wants to better understand who he is as he is expanding the circles, what he must do in relation to the largest thing he can ponder. And he calls this three metaphors, calls to mind. He says, I circle like a falcon returning to a falconer, or a storm around the primordial tower of God, or finally, and my favorite, he says, I turn like I am a great song. I love this notion that we are songs swirling around God, that our lyrics and our melodies, joy, and our lives make music. But ultimately, Rilke ends the poem without deciding upon one of the three interpretations. Hearing it, we are asked to make a decision, just as we are tasked at living our lives in widening circles, embracing the beauty that comes with circling this earth, circling each other, and circling a higher power. Are you a falcon returning in obedience to an owner? I doubt it. Are you a storm darkening judgment and pain? Maybe sometimes, but not at your best. You are a great song. At your best, you know that life matters. That to give to widening circles that pull you out of your comfort zone and into the lives of others. Don't forget the spiritual homework you're doing right after this by meeting the least interesting person you know in this room. And remember, your homework is always as a member of this community, to widen the circle into creating a world that has the intention to love. And then the song begins to emerge. To commit to change and equity for all. For your family and church and your neighborhood and city and country. Then the song strengthens and will sustain something bigger than your life, in which your song will be a part. Because we are a collective of circles that widen the world. A great love. A great and worthy love. Amen.